my talk, what the front of the front-end developer brings to your team. Thanks for attending. It's 3:15 on the conference day, so lots of people are tired. Lots of people are probably still drinking coffee. So thank you for attending. I really appreciate it. A little bit more about me. My name is Aubrey Sambor. I am a senior front-end developer. I'm also one of the organizers at Alley Talks. We do monthly webinars on various topics on accessibility. I host sometimes. I was actually one of the speakers last month talking about color in CSS, and it's a cool group. So you just go to alleytalks.com, a11ytalks.com, if you want to learn more about the group that myself, Amy, June, April, a couple people who are here are also part of it. So we do that, and it's a lot of fun. I live in Massachusetts, so like north of Boston. So I flew down here on Thursday, and I'm having a good time. I love this conference, and I love the front of the front end, which is why I love this talk. You can find me online at a few different places. I'm mainly active on Mastodon at labyrinth.social/starshaped. I have a website at aubreysambor.com. And my LinkedIn is linkedin.com/AubreySambor if you want to add me there or find me at any of the places. I'm also on Drupal.org as Starshaped. I just don't have it listed here. So what am I going to talk about today? First, I'm going to talk what is a front of the front end developer, and how is it different from a back of the front end developer? Why do front of the front end skills matter in today's development world? How to convince your team that a front of the front end developer belongs on your team, and how a front of a front end developer can work with other members of your team to build a good website. First, I am going to go over some definitions, mainly what a front of the front end developer actually is. And a front of the front end developer, there's someone who keeps up to date with CSS, like knows about modern CSS, like knows when to use it, when to use other older techniques. They focus a lot on semantic HTML. They know when to use semantic HTML and why it's important to use semantic HTML. They think of accessibility from the start to the end of a project. Also, they know how to write presentational JavaScript, mainly show hide toggles, some animations, things that you might not be doing if you're doing React or things like that. So more presentational side of things with JavaScript. And a really important thing that they know how to do is they know how to use CSS, when to use CSS instead of JavaScript to solve a problem. There's a lot of people will try to use JavaScript first and not realize that you can use CSS to solve that same problem. So now, what is the back of the front-end developer? How is this different from what a front of the front-end developer is? Well, I talked about it just a little bit. They focus more on JavaScript, JavaScript frameworks like React, Vue, Ember, any of the other frameworks that have been around for a while. They're more knowledgeable with build tool setup, like they can set up Webpack, set up Vite, Rollup, things like that. And they can write and implement APIs for others on the team to consume, including front of the front end developers. Some of these are more traditional back-end computer science paradigms, like if you're doing anything with React, there's a lot of patterns that I recognize in back-end development, and I have experience as a back-end developer as well. So a back of the front end developer has some of that knowledge, but also mainly focuses on JavaScript. But you might have also heard a term, full stack developers, and where do those people fit into what I was just talking about? Well, a full stack developer, they can handle the responsibilities of a front of the front end developer and a back of the front end developer. They're equally proficient at both back and front end technologies, and I had to be a little snarky on the bottom and say it's a magical unicorn that can do it all, because that's what everybody wants, is someone who can do it all. But usually, as you'll see in my next slide, that's not the case. So this is a quote from Brad Frost. He's really well known for atomic design, if you've ever heard of that. But he wrote a blog post titled Full Stack Developers, and this is a quote that I really like from this blog post. In my experience, full stack developers always translates to programmers who can do front-end code because they have to and it's easy, quote unquote easy. You can see the quotes there, where they're more of a back of the front-end developer, but they have to do the front of the front end because they have to. Like it's, oh, this is easy, this will be quick. Like we don't really need to know how to do a lot with it, so we can just knock that out when we're doing the back end, which I don't really agree with. I think, again, I'm giving this talk, what do we bring to your team? So obviously I don't agree with this, so I think front of the front-end developers have their own skill sets that really matter. And that's what I'm going to go into next. Why front of the front-end skills matter. So these are some of the skills we offer. And I was saying this earlier, modern CSS, semantic HTML, knowledge of accessibility, which is very, very important, and knowing how to write presentational JavaScript. First, I'm going to talk a little bit about CSS. We keep up with the latest and greatest in CSS. This leads to more performant code and smaller file sizes. One of these techniques, and this is still pretty new, and I have some code pens that I'm going to show, is modern CSS, such as text wrap balance. And I'm going to show you what text wrap balance looks like in case you haven't seen it. So I'm going to go over here, and I am going to go this way, the text wrap balance. So I have an example of a code pen here that demonstrates what text wrap balance does. I have two rectangles of text. The first one is text wrap balance, both of them say testing text wrap balance in a container. The one on the top does not have text wrap balance applied to it. So you can see that it's uneven, where testing text wrap balance in A is on one line, and the word container is by itself on the bottom. Now what text wrap balance does, and I actually have it defined in the code down here, I have a class of text wrap that I added to this bottom square here with the text wrap balance applied to it. And with that, you'll see that the two lines are more balanced. That the line one is texting text wrap, and then the second one is balance in a container. So it kind of makes it a little more even. Designers really, really like this because it doesn't look kind of off like the top one is. So this is a good thing that a front-end developer knows and knows how to use. And this should be supported in all browsers now too. So you can use this today. Wrong way. Next up, another technique that front-end developers know about is logical properties. And these are a better way to write directional CSS. In the past, you would do something like margin right or margin left. And then if you were supporting any kind of right to left language, you would have to set separate separate CSS that had the direction of right to left, and doing it and then rewriting the entire thing in reverse. With logical properties, instead of writing margin left or margin right, you write margin inline start and margin inline end. That way, it doesn't matter what direction it is. If you have it set to right to left, it'll know what the start and the end is because of that. So you don't have to duplicate your code, and it saves you some time. Another thing that a lot of front-end developers know about is when to use Flexbox and when to use Grid, and which ones are a better, which one to use in different situations. I don't have an example of this, but my rule of thumb with Flexbox and Grid is that if it's a one-dimensional layout, like say a header, or like a heading where you have a logo on one side and maybe some navigation on the other, I'll use Flexbox for a one-dimensional thing like that. And if I'm building a whole layout, I'll use Grid for that because it's more of a two-dimensional, where I have some columns and rows that I'm probably laying out more. So I tend to make my decisions based on that. And obviously that's not what you do all the time, but that's what I do for the most part. Another CSS thing that's really important is implementing basic transitions and animations using CSS when possible. So there are ways to do transitions and animations using JavaScript, but there are a lot of quick and easy ones that you can do using CSS instead. And again, knowing when to use CSS and when to use JavaScript is a great skill that front-end developers have. Next up is semantic HTML. And we know when to use which HTML element to use in each scenario. Like we know when to use a button versus a link, the difference between a button and a link. Mainly a link is what you use when you're navigating to a different part of your page, and a button is what you usually use when you're submitting something or doing some sort of action. I do see a lot of instances where they're interchanged, or I'll see a button inside a link, which doesn't really make sense to me. So just knowing that there's a difference between a button and a link and knowing when to use each one. Another good HTML element that I like using is a details and summary element, and I've got an example of that a little bit later on. Another one that I've done a little bit with but don't have an example for, the next two are the popover API and the dialogue element. And those will be native semantic ways to do modals and dialogues within HTML. And that will be pretty nice once it's more fully accessible and once it's more widely supported. So using that semantic HTML element as opposed to just using divs for everything is going to be really nice too. Next up is accessibility, something I really love. We know how to ensure accessibility as best as possible when we're building a site. The first one is a funny example of building a button using semantic HTML. And this is more of a what not to do situation here. So go to my next little thing here. And this is buttons versus links. It kind of goes back to what I was talking about earlier first with what a button is and what a link is. And I've got some HTML over here that shows you an actual button. And then I said how not to build a button. And I have another button over right below it that's a div role of button with a JavaScript onClick event. Don't do this. It's not accessible, and you can just use the button element instead. So I just wanted an example of this is what you shouldn't do. And I've definitely seen divs that are buttons, and it's not pretty. Don't do it. Use the button element. It's a lot better. And another thing that front of the front end developers know is when to use ARIA and when not to use ARIA. Of course, the first rule of ARIA is to not use ARIA if you don't need to, but there are some instances of when you should. And I wish I had some examples of that in here, but I do not. So that would have been a good one to put in. Using color palettes that follow color contrast guidelines, making sure that color palettes are they have sufficient contrast. We test sites using multiple accessibility tools and know how to manually test sites using screen readers and keyboard navigation. All of that is also really important. Again, presentational JavaScript. That's something else we know how to write. We know how to write vanilla JavaScript toggles to show and hide dropdowns. We can use the Web Animations API, which is a JavaScript library, to implement transitions and animations. And we can implement tooltips and modals, of course, ensuring accessibility for these too. But we can use JavaScript for those as well. To summarize that part, front-end developers add a lot to a team. Our skills matter to the success of a project. Next up is how to convince your team that our skills matter, in case they think, why do we need a front-end developer? Can our JavaScript developers do all this? Like, they can, but we actually have a skill set that's important too. And this is why it's important. We have that knowledge of accessibility. We have that knowledge of semantic HTML. We have in-depth knowledge of CSS techniques that JavaScript developers or back-of-the-front-end developers might not know about. And that can easily add to the experience you're delivering to your clients. And we can also collaborate with a ton of different members of the team to build a site that is really successful. And I feel like our collaboration skills are really, really important and something to really focus on. Again, I'm going to go a little bit over accessibility and semantic HTML. I'm saying it over and over again because these are important. And these are kind of statistics that make it that you can use to convince your team that front-end skills matter. With accessibility, the WHO estimates that 15% of the world population live with some sort of disability. So it's important to build sites with that people with visual, auditory, vestibular disorders, and others can use the sites we build. Also, the Web A Million, it's a site that comes out every year. The 2025 one came out, I think, in April or early May. And this one notes that almost 95% of home pages had detected WCAG2 failures. And most of these were from color contrast. So it's really important to focus on color contrast and make sure you have sufficient contrast on your sites. Another thing of note from the Web A Million is that ARIA usage has increased 18.5% just in the last year, since the 2024 report. And home pages with ARIA average 50% more detected errors than pages without. So this is why it's really important to know when to use ARIA and when not to. Again, here's some more information about why accessibility is important. People with disabilities, they use the web as much as everybody else, so they shouldn't be left out of the experience. The web's for everybody, so it should be built for everyone. And I've got to mention the legal impact. It's not my favorite, but I know a lot of like higher ups like to hear like, oh, there's lawsuits, you know, got to make sure we're not going to get sued. So this shouldn't be the main reason, but it's still important to focus on it. And front-end developers would work to eliminate accessibility issues such as color contrast, empty links, missing form labels, and other issues. And those three, the color contrast, empty links, and missing form labels, are some of the top issues that websites have with accessibility failures. And we would also know when to use ARIA and when to use semantic HTML to build a component, and we would avoid this extraneous ARIA that could cause some problems. So that is about accessibility. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some upcoming CSS techniques that aren't, they're not supported by all browsers. So I can show you a couple code pens on this page that are some cool things that would be great once they are supported in all browsers. So let me go over here. Go. Where'd it go? Oh, it's working before. All right. Oops. I have to go this way. All right, so the first one is showing interpolate size instead of the web animations API to animate the details element. So this was one thing that usually you'd want to do some animation for your details and summary elements. Like, I want to open this, and I want it to have a fancy transition like that, where it's not just opening. There's like a slight transition when I'm opening this, where it says, here's some text that shows a fancy transition using the Web Animations API. So the top one here is using the Web Animations API, and here is the JavaScript that is doing just that animation to open that thing. It is, keep on scrolling, keep on scrolling. I didn't write this JavaScript, but doing that one little thing takes 126 lines of JavaScript just to do this. Oh, I want this to like have a fancy little like transition where it's not just like abruptly opening and closing it. So that's with the Web Animations API, and that currently is the main way to do that kind of animation in details and summary or details elements. But in Chrome right now, there is something called interpolate size. And what this is a very little bit of CSS that you add to your details and summary elements that does the same thing, but it's all using CSS. And I've got it all in here. All you do is in the root, you set your interpolate size to allow keywords. And then you set this pseudo element here that is the content of your details element to have a block size. And then there's a transition for it. And then when it's open, it has block size to auto. So the problem that interpolate size solves is with the details and summary element, you don't know what the height is. So this is essentially being able to do transitions from 0 to auto without knowing what the height is. And that's going to be great for not only details elements, but for a lot of other elements. Once this is actually supported in other browsers than Chromium. I'm using Vivaldi here, so that's a Chromium browser. So this works here, but this will not work in Firefox or Safari right now. So that's one thing that's upcoming that's going to be really cool. Another one that I think might actually be supported in more browsers now is relative color syntax. And it's a way to implement colors in your design system using less code. And this is an example of that here. So I've got two rectangles. I have a relative syntax that's green and a relative syntax hue shift that is purple. And I've got some code in here. I'm going to skip some of this. I have this hue shift here. I'm using HSL to do a relative color syntax. And I'm starting from green. I'm just using the green keyword color. And I'm splitting up. I'm dividing it into H, S, and L. So that is just green, so that's kind of boring. So what is this doing? I want to shift the hue. Since it's HSL, I can shift the hue to make it a different color if I want to. And you can do this with the saturation and lightness too. Like you can do this. Yeah, you can do this with both the saturation and lightness. I just did the hue. All I'm doing here is calculating what the green color is. I'm adding. Let's see what number that is. 200. So what that's doing, hue is represented as a degree of a color wheel. So green by default is looks like 120. So I'm adding 200 to it. So it's 320. And the color of 320 is this purple. So I'm just able to change the color of this just by doing this calculation in here. And again, you can do the same thing with saturation or lightness. You can do like lightness minus 50%. Or something like that to make it lighter or darker. I can't remember which one it does off the top of my head. But you're able to do things really easily with relative color syntax that before you'd have to have custom properties for the hue, the saturation, the lightness. You'd have to calculate them and do all this. But this makes it really easy. It's all in one line and a lot more straightforward. The last one I have a demo for is something called margin trim. So margin trim is only supported in Safari right now, and this is going to be an easy way to trim off the bottom of margin, especially if you're in lists or anything like that. So this is an example. This is again a Chromium browser. So I have a list of 3 items. There is margin all around and margin below each item. It looks kind of funky because the third item, I don't want that bottom margin because I want it to look more even. With margin trim, you'll be able to do that. You can see that this browser does not support margin trim, so I'm going to fire up Safari here. And this browser does support margin trim, and you can see that this margin on the bottom of this last list item is no longer here. And the thing that you do is you just do this margin trim block end, and it's saying, okay, at the end of my list item, or at the end of my unordered list, get rid of the margin that's below, that's not defined by my list item. So it's getting rid of the LI styles that I have. Let me just scroll around and find it. I'm not sure where it is, but I do have styles that there is a margin bottom, or margin block end on the end, right here. There's a margin block end of 2 rems on each one, and margin trim gets rid of that because we want it to look pretty even. So that would be a really nice one to have once that's supported in more browsers besides Safari. I think that's it for that. Other things that are coming up are view transitions and scroll-driven animations. Those ones will do a lot of really cool things. View transitions might actually be supported in most browsers, and they just add like a fancy effect when you're going from one page to another on a site. And then at scope is a new one that's coming up in CSS that you can reduce duplicate code and help avoid style leaks. So you'll be able to define at scope and define styles to only apply within a certain bit of your DOM so that the styles aren't applying everywhere. So why is all this important? Knowing how to write CSS using the latest technologies can save coding time, and it can reduce the size of your files. Using these new techniques can make your site stand out, and it can drive more traffic to your site that way. And new color techniques can help you with your design system colors if you have a design system, for more easy maintainability and saving time. Next thing I'm going to talk about is collaboration with your team. I feel like this is a really important one. Being able to collaborate with everybody else on your team just adds a lot of value. Some front-end developers have design experience, so they can assist designers in building prototypes. Some have back-of-the-front-end development experience, so they can help tweak some JavaScript. And some might actually have back-end development experience, like say in Drupal, being able to write PHP. So they can help implement the design in a way that makes the most sense with the back end. And why is this important? Well, it's just great to collaborate with other people. It's our most important job. We work well with designers, back-of-the-front-end developers, back-end developers, and project managers. And this is how we collaborate with designers. And this is my favorite thing to do as a front-end developer. I love collaborating with design as early as possible. I like to work alongside a designer, especially at the start of the project. And sometimes that's hard. I know, especially if you work in an agency. There's a lot of times where design will be brought in first to show the client mock-ups. And then after the client approves the mock-ups, that's when front-end development comes in. And that's really hard because I like having input earlier on in the project to make sure that we can actually build the product that was approved. So I like being able to collaborate as early as possible. Sometimes that's hard, but it's something I really strive for at the jobs I work at, just being able to work together with designers. Also, designers can bring new ideas to front-end developers. They can assist with transitions and animations that would make the website stand out. We can also collaborate with back-of-the-front-end developers. Again, they work on setting up tooling, writing and configuring APIs, and writing business logic. And we ensure that any HTML that the JavaScript developers have is semantic and accessible, and also write any styles and add any presentational JavaScript on top of whatever else they're writing. We collaborate with back-end developers, and a good example of this is Drupal. I've worked with a lot of back-end developers in Drupal, where they build modules and write custom functions, and we can go in there and use whatever functions they have to generate the variables we need in our Twig templates. And if we're using single directory components, being able to pull those in there too. And then on the other hand, front-end developers can help write CSS for modules that back-end developers are writing. I've had to do that a lot in my career, going in there and getting tagged. I've definitely helped a lot of back-end developers who, they're like, I need some CSS help. Can you come in and write this for this module? Yeah, that's great. That's what I like to do. We also like to collaborate with project managers. We can help with ticket creation, defining the definition of done with accessibility and visual regression testing, which is really important. We also can get involved with the project early on, like I was saying earlier, with designers, just helping with the discovery process to make sure that what we're doing makes sense and we can get everything working together as soon as we can. So in conclusion, front-end developers can be useful at every part of the project, beginning to end, and we collaborate effectively with every member of the team. So wrapping up, this is just a recap of what I talked about. We're an important part of every team. We have a unique skill set that integrates with the skill sets of other members of the team, including CSS, HTML, and accessibility. We bring value to your team by keeping up with CSS, bringing our accessibility best practices to the team, and writing semantic HTML for each area of the site. And we also collaborate with other members of the team, including designers, back-of-the-front-end developers, back-end developers, and project managers. If you want to read more, I've got a ton of links. They're great. The last one on this list is one that I actually found last week about how to tie accessibility to business objectives. In case you want to talk to your manager, or talk to higher ups at your company about why accessibility matters. There's some good tips in there. And again, if you want to find me online and you want to learn more about me, my name is Aubrey Sambor, senior front-end developer, organizer at Alley Talks, live up in New England, love the front of the front end, and you can find me on Mastodon for the most part. And that's it. Anyone have any questions? It's okay if you don't, because it is 3:46 p.m. and yeah, it is end of the day. If not, then go enjoy some coffee and enjoy the last session of the day. So thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
Yeah.